And here we are, Charles Moscowitz. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Michael D. Shaw is with us, and Michael is a longtime medical and science journalist and writer and thinker. His work is available at various sites. I just discovered a new one, Mike, which I like a lot, and that is space.com,
Oh,
which carries your articles. Yeah. Um,
oh, for
so,
heaven's sake. Okay. Yeah.
and they do a pretty good job. Um, you have, we want to talk with you about current events and during. I'd like your impressions on the Republican convention so far, for starters.
Well, I must admit I haven't watched gavel to gavel, although I don't even think are there gavels anymore? Uh, Coverage of it, but certainly there are a number of highlights. Uh, I think the important point to be made is the TV ratings. It's just a bloodbath compared to the DNC. I've heard numbers from 6 times the ratings to 10 times the ratings.
Well, now I want to ask you about that because I don't trust the Drudge Report anymore. That's part of the deep state. I mean, especially since I think Drudge's father has taken over there.
Oh,
Um, and so their headline was that the Democratic first night was bigger than the Republican first night. And they're very negative about Trump. I mean, I wonder if that's because they want to keep the race going.
um, I don't know. There was somebody wrote a book, which I forget the name of, and it was publicized a couple of months ago into what happened to Matt Drudge and how he turned like this.
Oh,
Uh,
it's terrible. I mean, don't but depend. I mean, it's don't depend on the Drudge Report. I saw something about that. Which do you follow Bill Still's YouTube channel?
I've seen it on occasion. I'm not an avid channel follower.
I understand. Well, I like Bill Still, and he's been around for a long time. He's been investigating in Washington since the '60s. He's very, connected to insider sources. He's usually
Oh,
pretty reliable, and he says that he noticed a change when Drudge basically fired their longtime ad agency that handled their commercials. Um, and this was an agency that he was making millions of dollars from commercials, so there really was no reason rationally why he would fire them. But he fired them, and about a week later, the portfolio was picked up by this group that is connected to left causes. It's his father is a big left wing activist
mm.
and connected to his father, and that since then the whole demeanor of the page has changed. I mean, it's almost about the same as like reading the New York Times. It's openly and virulently anti-Trump. This started with the whole impeachment hoax.
Oh, yeah.
The way they covered that was horrible. It was just, it made your heart sink to read the way they covered it. And
Well,
so you see, can't so they're gone. They can't be
yeah, I
reached.
was I was going to say that the biggest beneficiary of this thing, I was going to say was whatfinger.com, but actually Citizen Free Press has just taken off like mad
Hmm.
um, as a result of the change in Drudge. And one other interpretation is maybe Drudge wasn't really all that conservative as much as opportunistic, because remember the thing that launched him was Monica Lewinsky,
Right.
which was uh, simply a salacious type of clickbait
Oh yeah.
story.
No, he covers that, and he does a lot of Hollywood. He always did.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's it. And even if you look at the Lewinsky story, that in a way came along at a time which distracted the public from the real scandal of Bill Clinton, anyways, which was the China collusion.
Oh, yeah.
But putting that's old news. Uh, Getting back to the convention. I mean, I have watched a lot of it. I think it's inspiring. I think Trump knows exactly what he's doing with television, anyways,
Oh, of
right?
course.
And it also shows kind of the businessman side of him in that he likes to get things done that are tangible, even if they're just symbolic. And it's actually more than symbolic. Like he signed an executive pardon for that man who had been in prison and who,
Ponder. Yeah.
yes, and he came out and he started a nonprofit group that helps prisoners get placed. And he brought him to the White House along with the FBI agent that had convicted him, and now they're very best friends. And they made a little speech, and then he signed an executive order pardoning him. Very, symbolic, and also he swore in new citizens, 6 new citizens, with a swearing in ceremony at the White House. These are things that have great symbolism. He's a great showman in that way. Plus, I think he likes to do things that have tangible results and that do affect someone's life positively. I mean, he has a long history of that. People don't realize that about Trump. Trump has, stepped in. He does watch a lot of television news, and he's seen situations where someone was confronting a catastrophe or a hardship, and he's called them, he sent them a check. He often does that, and I think that's a reflection of his business ethos. He likes to use his position and leverage to get stuff done and to help people. And on a presidential level, I mean, this is one of the things that separates him from somebody like Biden and them, who's been in office for 37 years. I think longer, hasn't he? I mean,
Oh yeah, it's about 47.
47 years. He's never done a goddamn thing, right? He just sort of goes along and gives windy speeches and talks a lot of double talk. Whereas Trump, whether you like him or not, and I do like him, but he does stuff. He's active. He's a true executive in that sense.
Well, I
And
think
yeah,
yeah, I was going to say ultimately that's really what is threatening about him to the establishment.
it is.
Because I mean, Biden is an extreme case, but if you look at the establishment, they basically are there and kind of fight to live another day sort of thing. That maybe there's some marginal things that occur, but by and large, nothing improves, nothing gets done. And in the case of Biden, of course, it's absurd. Elect me president, and now I'm going to do something.
Yeah, and I like the way, I think it was Eric Trump who gave a really good speech, who said, well, he's been in office for 47 years. Now he's going to tell us in the 48th year, suddenly something is going to change. Suddenly he's going to wake up and start to actually do things. I mean, that's right. I mean, it's, just this kind of a, get along and doesn't mean anything. There's nothing there. And
Yeah, well, here was the extreme case. I think it's the worst that I've ever heard of. The small state tyranny. You can mention guys like Mike Mansfield that came from Montana, and he was in the Senate for 150 years, and Harry Reid. But Biden comes from the second smallest state, and really, what has he ever done? Other
right,
than
it just sort of
I've been
controls
there.
a little kind of a rotten borough, as it were.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, whether the ratings are really 6 times as high or 10 times as high, I don't know, but they're most assuredly higher. And in fact, there's been tweets going around the Democrats side saying, please don't watch TV because he's getting higher ratings. But why would he not get higher ratings with a positive, inspirational message as opposed to gloom and doom, trotting out these divisive figures that are just lying through their teeth about everything? What was really the point of all that?
They didn't even, looking back on it, because I watched that as much as I could stomach it.
Yeah.
And with Trump, I mean, it's person after person after person delivering substantive comments where they talk about real technical issues and real issues, and they list them. Whereas with the Democrats, we got who was it, Eric Eilish, or some musician with blue hair, singing and
Billy
Eilish.
Eilish.
Yeah, I mean, or we got a bunch of like Zoom chats from people doing that Hollywood thing that they always do, where they keep repeating the same line. I like this. I like this. I like this. I like, you know what I mean? It's and it was like a lot of God. It was just a lot of nothing. It was a big. They completely squandered it. Nobody said anything, and the only thing substantial that they said was how much they hate Trump. And I just don't think that's flying this time. You know, yes, they got their 20% of people who have this irrational hatred of Trump, but that's not going to cross the line. I mean, they've already, the last poll shows that Trump is up to 51% among independents, and that's who's going to decide the election.
Well, of course, the other thing that was ridiculously conspicuous by its absence was any reference at all to these riots going on. And even Don Lemon has come out saying that Biden better take a stand on this thing because it's absurd that they're avoiding this issue.
It's going to lose it for them. Do you think that in Kenosha, Wisconsin, burning to the ground, you know, Portland, Oregon, Chicago neighborhoods, you know, St. Louis, that's not going to help. That doesn't, every time that happens, it hurts them, and they're ignoring it because they don't want to talk about it. And the more they ignore it, the bigger it's going to be for Trump.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And a related issue, I don't know how much publicity it got in New England, but over the weekend, it primarily happened in downtown DC, where now the restaurants only operate outdoors. And these BLM activists were coming in, harassing patrons of the restaurants to, give a power
communist
fist, and some did and some didn't. But this absurd empowerment of these losers is, I guess, something that I've observed for decades, but now, before, at least they didn't literally get in your face like that. But who in the world thinks that that's a winning strategy?
I mean, and now the last hurrah, the final, push after trying to manipulate the pandemic in a way that would politicize them, which hasn't flown, and rioting in the streets. Now they're doing like the old Occupy Wall Street thing.
Yeah.
And they're going to be, and you've talked about this, Mike, you actually brought it to my attention last time. They're going to be occupying the White House, I think starting in September, mid-September, right up to Election Day. And I don't think that's going to go too well for them. I mean, I can't imagine that being a happy image for them. I mean, they've already tried, they criticized Trump for pointing out the fact that St. John's Church across the street from the White House, by which every American president, with one exception, since James Madison has prayed, that they burned it. And then he goes across the street and he tries to put a light on that, and all of a sudden they think this is something horrible. This is like, it's they don't explain why.
Well, and why is because he did it. And of course, related to that is, it's really a Trump. It's off the politics side like this, but there are reams and reams of data coming out now showing the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine, which he was
afraid to mention the word on this show because we could lose the show. But
okay, HCQ.
Yeah, HCQ. That's right. Let's pretend we didn't hear that.
Yeah, all right.
You can't mention that word, or the thugs who run the social network will censor you for some reason. It's interesting.
And this guy is no less than some Yale professor.
Yeah, right. He's one of America's most respected epidemiologists.
That's absolutely right. And he's implying gently that he doesn't understand that there's some conspiracy against it. And then he makes a comment about my favorite nemesis, Tony Fauci, regarding how this played out during the height of AIDS in the 1980s. That evidently Fauci was happy to watch people die because he didn't have what in his little mind the quote unquote gold standard double-blind clinical trial to prove out AZT. And ironically, there's some question whether that was even a great drug anyway, as it plays out. But the problem with Fauci is that he's a typical Washington bureaucrat who, simply by being around long enough, has proven his staying power, but I don't think he knows very much. In fact, I'm pretty sure he doesn't. He has no advanced training in infectious disease or allergy immunology, but he's fooled the public. I mean, what does it take for you to be simply an IM doctor who never saw a patient after residency and now is touted as America's top infectious disease expert based on what? On the job training? And no less than a very good friend of mine who's a recently retired allergy immunology doctor in LA, had some high-end celebrity clientele, big dude, was the head of the local society in LA some years ago. And he met Fauci, and he, bought into the hype. Yeah, this guy's some guru on allergy and immunology. And I said, Larry, no, he's got no background on it. And it's just blew his mind. Because I guess based on 100,000 years of hype, you think maybe some of it must be true. And that's kind of maybe what's going on with Biden. Well, he's been around for 47 years, so
he's being promoted by the establishment. He's a tool. Fauci also, I mean, my understanding of it, I don't know a lot about it, was that the drug AZT actually killed more people than AIDS itself.
Yes.
And that, like, for example, Magic Johnson and Arthur Ashe both got AIDS, and Magic Johnson realized that the drug was poison and he stopped taking it and he lived, whereas Arthur Ashe took the drug and died.
That's exactly right.
And that's anecdotal, I acknowledge, but nevertheless, it was a highly toxic drug that had nothing to do with AIDS. It was being used for other purposes, and there's very big questions about what that was about.
Well, I mean, that was typical Tony Fauci, though. Because look at remdesivir. He's been touting this drug, which has been a total bust, by the way. And with AZT, you're exactly right. In fact, I'm impressed because very few people knew that Arthur Ashe versus Magic Johnson thing. But that's absolutely true, that this drug was touted primarily by Fauci, ends up being extremely toxic. And Peter Duesberg actually thinks that in some patients, it caused what was later identified as AIDS.
Right.
So, but there you go. That's our brain trust.
So here we are. The riots are taking place during the Republican convention. I don't know if you've had a chance to, actually CNN is doing a better job than Fox, and I'm critical of Fox because they're constantly, at least on the first night, I think they got better, but they're constantly interrupting the speeches.
They're cutting away. Yeah.
I don't want to hear Hannity's commentary. I mean, he's, you know what I mean? I find him to be a little tiresome. I mean, he's okay and all, but, I don't need to have him cut in every minute and talk about something while it's happening. So I'd rather hear the speakers, whereas CNN seems to have let it run. And, of course, MSNBC, who has also, in a way, done a better job than Fox in terms of letting things run. I mean, it's hilarious to watch Rachel Maddow and what's her name? I don't remember that African-American woman.
Oh, Reed. Joy
Reed. Their smirks and their twisting and their and their fact checking. I mean, which is, it's flat. I mean, they're nitpicking every little word, and it's even their fact checking is bogus and untrue when you listen to it in the right context. But they don't have much to say. They don't want to say anything good. They never would. But you can tell that they're just trying to stretch to find criticism.
Well, yeah, I mean, the difference, of course, with Fox is that they have obviously pro-Trump commentators, so they're going to want to say, I mean, yeah, Hannity's over the top with this, but in contrast, what's CNN going to do when somebody makes a good point? I mean, how can you criticize the Maximo Alvarez speech? What are you going to say?
Oh, that was powerful. Did you see it?
Yes.
That he really nailed the issue. And I love that he said, this reminds me of Castro, what I'm
Oh,
seeing in these cities. I mean, that, and socialism. I mean, that was very moving and very powerful.
so this is it. I mean, what is CNN going to say about it? So they had the good sense of, I guess, leaving it on, and they,
Moving
how many
on.
times could they go to their trick of, oh, we just lost the feed. I'm sorry.
And also, did you hear that Attorney General from Kentucky, African American man? He really laid it out. He goes, Biden is involved with very old thinking on issues of race, and that that he would suggest that I'm not black because I don't support this stuff. I mean, obviously I'm black, and it's so insulting that we all think alike. I mean, he just really like laid that out. He did a brilliant job of going
Yeah.
after them, and I think that Biden, while he's not exactly playing with all the full deck, if you know what I mean, he nevertheless, his views do reflect the left. This kind of, Rudyard Kipling, white man's burden view of black people. They talk to black people like they're children. I've seen this. I've seen liberals do this. Oh, they somehow are not qualified. Like they really are, in the real de facto sense, racists. They
Well, yeah,
actually do believe.
certainly
Yeah,
the
I mean, somebody like
low
Biden
expectation.
and the rest of these people, they really do believe that black people are inferior, and they talk down to them, and they think they need the great white administrator to help them run their lives. They really do. I mean, it's classic old-fashioned Darwinian racism is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not sort of vicious KKK
No,
style
it's worse. In a way,
racism.
it's worse
Yeah,
because at least
but
in
it is
KKK
worse.
they put on a white schmuck and they run around with a burning cross. You know who they are. But with this case, it's all sort of institutionalized and accepted and sanitized. And in that sense, it's even more damaging because, they talk to black people like they're defective, and it's so condescending and so offensive to me and insulting, and I think hopefully to a growing number of African Americans,
I
and
think
I
so.
think it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be people that in the black community that were the original Democrats, i.e., the ones that Roosevelt brought over because of all the free stuff. And there's going to be free stuff people,
Right.
but
Well, the
I'd like
black
to think.
establishment is always going to be with their hand out, just like the Jewish establishment.
Well, tell me
You know,
about
the,
that. Is the needle moving at all
no. I
with
mean,
the?
I actually am not optimistic. And maybe it would be a miracle. I mean, the Jews, you could have um, Donald Trump stand in Jerusalem and sing Hatikva with the head of Hamas and right, and do a circle of peace, and they still will not vote for Trump.
Well, what is it? I mean, what is going to break this spell? Which
I don't think it's worth even paying any attention to them. They can shove it.
really?
They're not enough people. Let them do what they do. They're beyond help. But I think black people, on the other hand, can be reached. Because they're in the real world. They're
I
dealing
I
with
believe so.
their businesses are being burned down. They're being killed by people because they want to pull police out of their neighborhoods. They're being they're suffering as a result of leftist policies. They're being told that they have to send their kids to these rotten schools as opposed to Trump, who wants to, allow school vouchers so they can go to a better school. They're the ones who are, their young men are in prison because of Biden's, laws that he so proudly promoted, which put people in prison for a small bag of marijuana.
Right.
I mean, so I think they can be reached. Jews are beyond the pale. I don't pay. That's an exercise in futility. I don't. I wouldn't even waste my breath.
Well, it is interesting because I mean to hear you say that because uh, I'll tell you that's sort of my view exactly. That I see some hope in the black community, but this Jewish thing where being a socialist is the best alternative to the czar. I mean, that's
Well, that's their
that's 100
religion.
years old.
That's their religion. They've replaced Judaism with socialism, and it's they're just well, it's a complicated issue. I mean, there was actually a very good book by Professor Benjamin Ginsberg of Johns Hopkins. I interviewed him years ago,
Hmm.
called "The Fatal Embrace: Jews and the State," and he talks about how during the 2,000 years of diaspora, the Jewish communities in Christian Europe and assumedly in Muslim countries, they were in a vulnerable position because they could draw the favor of the prince and of the king by providing services that the king wanted that he couldn't do himself. Like diplomacy and trade and banking and medical things and cultural things. And they would win the favor, and in exchange, they would have their community protected. But then you'd have a new king come along, or there'd be a change of mind, and all of a sudden they're being put away in ghettos and being exiled out. So there was always this kind of insecurity under their feet. They weren't allowed to own land. They weren't allowed to get into certain businesses. They were always kept, under the official protection of the Pope, who usually was okay with Jews, but at the same time he allowed, because of the Catholic Church's concept of subsidiarity, the various bishops and various princes had a lot of power.
Right.
And so they didn't have a sense of security. They were always ready to get up and move and get out. And I think that as a result, psychologically, maybe Jews have tended to look to authority for help. They tend to observe the laws of a land more vigorously than your average person because they want protection. They want to feel secure. I mean, I'll give an example, and this is strictly anecdotal, but in my opinion, you'll find that it is Jews who are the most likely to put on the mask at every last minute and wipe the doorknob and wipe down the groceries and, wash their hands 10 times a day. They go out of their way to observe the law, and to observe, to conform and to fit in. And I think that might be why Jews are attracted to something like socialism, because what is socialism if it's not, public ownership of production, public ownership of everything? It's the state becomes a messianic instrument, I mean, to save you. And it gives them a sense of security. I think again, we're talking kind of subliminal here, and I don't think most Jews are aware of this, but this was the premise of Benjamin Ginsberg book, Jews and the State, The Fatal Embrace.
Hmm.
And I think he was right on.
Well, I mean, if you want to go that route, it goes back quite a ways. I mean, to Egypt.
Yeah, well, slavery, I mean, sure. But
and of course, as you know, because you're knowledgeable about this stuff, certainly not all the Jews left in the Exodus. Many wanted, stay with Big Daddy. And that also happened in the Maccabean era, where they wanted to hang in with Rome, which
right.
may
Well,
have been good for a
I mean,
while.
the Maccabean era, I mean, in a way, the reason why the good Lord had the tribes of Israel wander in the Sinai for 40 years, when in fact they could have gotten to the promised land in 2 months. I mean,
Right.
probably in 3 weeks, was because that whole generation had to die out because they didn't have an understanding of what freedom was. I mean, they had been so inculcated into the slave system. They had been institutionalized by slavery. And you needed a new generation to understand freedom. I mean, it literally had to take that kind of time and that experience to get there. And as far as the Maccabees goes, that was a civil war within Judaism between the Hellenized, Romanized part of the population who
Right.
wanted to assimilate and who wanted to curry favor with the powers that be and who wanted to fit in and who learned Greek and who were very secular, and the more religious Jews who were headed up by Judah Maccabee and his brothers who rebelled against them. And a lot of it had to do with cultural things like the the Greeks were doing things like setting up gymnasiums where they
Right.
had men in the nude engaging in sports, and there was stuff like that the Maccabees did not like. They didn't want that kind of stuff.
Can't imagine why.
And so they wanted to bring Judaism back, and so they rebelled politically against the Greek emperor of Syria, the Syrian Greek, and they really brought Israel back to a vigorous sovereign state, and yet even then they were still at war with the what were called the Sadducees. They were the Hellenized segment who eventually threw their lot in with Rome, and I think it was the Sadducees who, this is an opinion,
Yeah.
who were at war with the Pharisees, and the Pharisees were devout Jews.
Yeah, they were the Orthodox.
And I think that Jesus, even his criticism of the Pharisees in the New Testament, shows me that he was a Pharisee, and that those were the sorts of arguments that Pharisees always had with each other. Some of them were very bitter. I mean, I'm not saying that he didn't let them off lightly, but it was the process of debating what is the Torah, what is God's will, and their combined enemy were the Sadducees, and I think it was the Sadducees who viewed Jesus as a threat to their power, just like they viewed because they viewed him as a Pharisee, and it was the Sadducees who advocated his execution.
Yeah.
For that reason. Anyway, that's a big subject. We don't need to.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, now they're sad, you see, if there's any left.
Well, the Sadducees today are the liberal Jews.
Yeah. Well,
they're the Hellenized Jews.
Yeah, because the Pharisees are the Orthodox now.
Yeah, exactly. Or they're the authentic Jews. They're the Torah true Jews. They're the Jews who believe in God, who believe in the Torah and all of its moral and ethical precepts. And who probably might be more supportive of President Trump, too, by the way.
Yes. So how are these riots going to end? Especially in the case of the governor of Wisconsin refusing federal help. I mean, maybe he'll change.
They're not going to end until Election Day. And they'll end if Biden wins. That's how they'll end. And I mean, it's sort of the same thing with the pandemic. Although I get the feeling that we're never going to see the end of the pandemic.
No, we get, and here's why. Once you've introduced the notion of someone testing positive, then it's basically game over. I mean, think about it. When you had flu epidemics, well, this guy gets the flu, whatever, he's out, he's out sick. But now, merely testing positive, which, by the way, as I said months ago, these tests aren't necessarily that reliable. Right. And now there was this NFL thing about 60 people or whatever it is tested positive, and it turns out they're not. So now there's always this mark you can put on.
It throws up more fear. Now, you mentioned, I think last time I had you on, Michael, I'm pretty sure it was you, who mentioned that if someone is, first of all, there are probably hundreds of thousands of people who are asymptomatic.
Right.
You and I could be asymptomatic. We don't know. I mean, and they'll never know because it'll never manifest itself. We all carry all sorts of viruses and germs. That's just part of the human condition. So the fact that they're testing more now shows that there are more people who are positive, and that so it's being used to create fear. But when someone is asymptomatic, correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't spread the disease. It only spreads if someone starts to show symptoms. Is that true?
Well, I mean, there's been talk on both sides of this.
Okay.
It would be unusual in infectious diseases for someone to be, now, I mean, there's the exception with typhoid Mary and so on, but it's very unusual for someone to be completely asymptomatic and yet spread, because that would imply that despite the fact that I'm, as they call it, shedding virus, somehow I have this mystical immunity to it, which I've developed through some celestial force because I never even got sick. Mm-hmm. That's not usually what happens with immunity. Normally, you get sick to some extent. You develop the antibodies, and unfortunately, in the case of corona, they don't stay around very long. You also have T cells, which supposedly can be active for 10 years. So I think the jury's out on that. But it would be very exceptional because coronavirus, cold viruses, normally speaking, I don't know, is there someone who's got a cold virus who's asymptomatic? You'll never know. But usually if you catch a cold, it was from that guy over there that was sneezing all over you.
Right.
You know?
So what that tells me is that we're seeing people who are tested and who are asymptomatic. We shouldn't worry about that. That's only if they start to show symptoms should they then isolate for 2 weeks or however and go through a difficult flu, which is not a pleasant thing, but at least they're out of harm's way, and
Right.
then they've got antibodies.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why the thing was wrong from the beginning in quarantining the healthy. That was absurd.
Right.
And all the numbers are coming in showing that the lockdowns didn't work. And it was more just an exercise in government control.
And that we can contrast that with Sweden, which did not do the lockdowns, and their rates of infection and death are really pretty much the same as everyone else's
Right.
who did do the lockdowns, as
Yeah.
you pointed out. I mean, I think that they also protected their elderly and their nursing homes, which is what a moral society should do, as opposed to what some of the blue states in this country did.
Well, speaking on that, how does Cuomo get a free pass on this nursing home thing?
I don't know. I mean, where are the people? You had thousands of people die in nursing homes. Where are those families? I mean, where are if that was my mother or father, I would be out there, with a pitchfork, standing in front of in Albany. I mean, what the hell? Where are people? Why aren't people talking about that?
Well, but in by way of example, in the Stoneman Douglas high school shooting,
Yeah.
the only guy that fits that mold that you're talking about is this Andrew Pollock, who wrote about his daughter.
Yes.
Now, that's a sad story, obviously. She wasn't the only victim. Where are the other parents that are up in arms? Are they so brainwashed by the Broward County Democratic Party that this was all because of guns? And if we had gun control, this wouldn't have happened. But it's the same thing, Some black career criminal gets killed, and the nation erupts. And as we were talking last time, some innocent 5-year-old kid gets shot, nobody cares. So how are the politics this perverted?
That is such a key question. That really goes to how far down the hole we've slipped as a society, that people are so out of touch with basic notions of truth, of understanding, that they would personally have lost touch. I mean, I heard the other day somebody who I'm actually pretty close to, we were talking about the election, and I mentioned that if you listen to the way the Democrats handle these things, they're obviously lying because they want to keep their base together and they're not saying anything. And she says, well, that's okay. That's good. They need to do that.
Okay, but
this is a
I understand.
college.
But what is this? What is this mythical greater good they're thinking of?
They have no idea.
Can they articulate what this is?
They have no idea. It's all this fuzz. Look, I mean, if we could look at the classic sources, I mean, if you look at Marx, he said very little about what communism would be. It was all the process of getting there. It's like dogs chasing after a meat truck. They get to it. What do they do with it? I mean,
Yeah.
It's he said the only thing he said was that governments would wither away, is the words he used, and the principle would be from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. That was the only thing really ultimately that he actually wrote about what a communist society would look like. So they don't know what they're talking about. They just know that they have to fight to get there. They have to, and they're motivated by hate. They have to hate anyone that they perceive as an obstacle to that path.
So, but what is psychologically wrong with someone who lives in this cloud their entire life? And I've met people
very
like that.
deeply psychologically problematic. They're out of touch with the most basic elements of their own humanity. I mean, they don't have. There's nothing going on inside. I mean, if you take a look at them, I mean, I don't mean to generalize, but there's not a lot of. It's almost like they're reactive. I mean, they're living for the day. It's like whatever feels good is good. They consume a lot of entertainment and a lot of externals. There's not a lot going on in the inner life, in the deeper world. I mean,
Evidently.
I know I'm generalizing, and there are exceptions, of course, but we have to somewhat generalize to get to an understanding.
Well, and yet that ends up being the constituency of that party,
It
because
is.
whatever Henry Jackson's Democrats ever existed, and I think that was overblown. I mean, that's long gone.
No, I think they did. I mean, there was the Reagan Democrats. In
Yeah,
fact, I think that my understanding is that tonight's Republican convention is going to focus on suburban women,
right.
right? Now, are they wasting their time? No, I think that women could be reached. I really do. I think they could, you have people who are living a real life who have invested in that life. I think that there can be a pitch could be made to women just like a pitch has been made to black people, and I think it could win. And I think that even if you shave off 1 or 2%, not only is it enough to win, but it's enough to shift and begin to change the culture if it's handled right.
I would agree.
Yeah.
And, you know, but here again, that's why there are these establishment rhinos that are against Trump because, and again, I don't know what the ultimate motivation of these people is.
Oh, I know. What the hell? I mean, these traitors. It's horrible, including some people that I once respected, like Mona Charen, good columnist.
Oh,
I
she went
follow.
down the drain. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, what is that? I sent her a note about it. She never got back to me, but I'm like, what the heck happened to you?
Well, because she has exactly the same problem that these idealistic quote unquote Democrats do. She has some concept of what the Republican Party is supposed to be, and the fact that there's this uh, blustering out there guy like Donald Trump. It's just that's not what happens in our polite country club society.
That's right. It's not. He doesn't speak with those phony British accent. But the thing is that a lot of these people, like Mona Charen and others, have been pretty good conservatives. I mean, lifelong conservatives. And Trump has been probably at least the most conservative president since Reagan in terms of his policies. You would think that they would applaud the fact that he has appointed so many federal judges that are conservative. That could affect an entire generation. I mean, his policies in terms of de-escalating foreign wars and making foreign nations pay for their own defense and helping bring about peace between Israel and the Arab nations.
Doesn't matter
These are,
because
yeah.
he's Trump. He's Trump.
Well, that's just it, and and when you listen to their rhetoric and this group called the Lincoln Project, it's so juvenile and ridiculous. Oh, he's not the right. He's mean and he's rude and he's he's most unpleasant. Yes, most unpleasant.
Yeah, there's riots
It's
in the streets, but he's most unpleasant.
yes, exactly, and it's so trivial and so.
George Will is another, but he
Oh
was
well,
he was long gone.
he was gone back then. And yeah, he is another one. I mean, it's disappointing, and I think even the late Charles Krauthammer sort of joined that crowd.
Well, you don't want to say bizarre things like this, but he died at a convenient time for his legacy. In that, you're exactly right. He was starting to become a lace curtain Republican himself, and probably would have been an anti-Trumper.
Yeah, I don't know. He seemed to be going in that direction. I always liked his column, but in a way, he was very much like Trump would be the type of person that he would like, and then he would try to come up with practical ideas and solutions to things like illegal immigration, stuff that a lot of even liberals used to talk about.
But he wasn't nice.
Well, you're right. I mean, that's what it comes down to. He doesn't say it with those phony euphemisms and double talk that they're so used to hearing.
Well, I mean,
And
the
that's, of course,
original
his job.
rhino
Yeah.
was probably Nelson Rockefeller.
Well, Nelson Rockefeller made no pretensions about being a conservative. He was a liberal.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't
but
expect
he had to be a Republican because in the Democratic Party then were all these unwashed types. So he could be a country club Republican, uh, and of course, we all relish what happened to Nelson Rockefeller in the end.
Well, yeah, that's right. There was a little scandal, and
Yeah,
you even have. I mean, they're trotting out the Democrats. I mean, Colin Powell, a fine man, great Joint Chiefs of Staff, but he's supported every Democratic candidate
yeah.
going back to, I think, Clinton. So it's like, what's the deal with that? I mean, it's. I don't know if they're going to have any impact. Who knows? They didn't last time.
Well, they
What do you
were
think is going to happen?
what with these Colin Powell types?
No, with the election.
Oh, uh, I think Trump's going to win. I think it's going to surprise the. Well, no, it's not going to surprise the pundits because at least they're going to be prepared a little more. Rather than coming out with these ridiculous 97% chance for Hillary, uh, they're
Well, they are doing that even now. I mean, look at as we started this show talking about the Drudge Report.
yeah.
They have Biden up 10 points. I mean, they have like, oh, the audience was bigger. I mean, it's hard. It's your heart sinks when you look at that.
Yeah, well,
But I don't. I mean,
here again, well, what's happening is he realizes he's lost his core audience long ago to the sites I mentioned earlier. So now he has to play to his base, which you see this kind of psychology play out. I mean, you may remember a writer named Samuel Francis, who was a conservative writer.
Mm-hmm.
Then he wrote a column which was not racist, but it was certainly on the edge. Okay. And that got him kicked out of certain places. So then he figured out that his core audience was people that liked this cloaked racism kind of stuff. And that was his very small core audience, and that's what he did. And so I think, but I think what happened was that Francis had lost, I think, a lot of the conservative following anyway. So he had to kind of cone down to that. And by the same token, I think Drudge is now going to this sort of weird, I want my Republicans to be like Nelson Rockefeller types. And there aren't, so whatever that core audience is, and Democrats that are, see, they saw the light, but no one goes on that site anymore. So.
No, that's long dead. So anyway, I just want to finish up by mentioning one final piece. I don't know if you saw this, but Hillary Clinton, once again, she spills the beans. She spoke about the election and she said, Biden has to win. We cannot give up. We cannot concede this election. We have to do whatever it takes to make sure Biden wins. What does that tell you? That tells you that they're going to contest the election. They're going to tie it up. This is why they want to do the mail-in ballots. They could tie this thing up and put in lawsuits in every state to keep the election from being counted.
But here's what happens. Certainly, if it's close, they can do that.
Yes.
But all they were able to do when Trump beat Hillary was these ridiculous appeals to the state electors to be,
and they had a few recounts under Jill Stein, which actually increased Trump's margins.
Yeah.
And also discovered huge voter fraud in Detroit. But the thing is that now with the pandemic continuing and with them going to ride this thing right out till the election day, scaring people away from voting, and even Anthony Fauci, to his credit, has said that it's certainly perfectly fine to go and vote in person.
Oh yeah.
So we will give him credit for that. But they're going to run this thing right up to election day, and then they're going to swamp the system. It's kind of the old Cloward-Piven approach from the 60s to overwhelm the system with paper, pouring in, they're stuffing the post box instead of the ballot box. And then they're going to start launching lawsuits, and they could run the clock right up to January 20th, the date the president is to be sworn in. And do you know what happens if there's no president on that date?
Yeah, it's the Speaker of the House, but
Nancy
remember,
Pelosi will be the next president, is what will happen.
well, okay, but her results may be held up also. I mean, she has to run for re-election.
Well, she's only running in a small district. They could pull that one off easy. I'm talking about a national election.
Yeah, I mean,
that could be a massive mess.
I've heard this scenario, but the other side of it is certainly in the Black community, there's a history, remember, of being disenfranchised. So there's a history in the Black community of, no, I want to be there at the polling place and cast my vote, baby.
Good.
So,
I mean, but speaking of which, you can see. I mean, maybe it's a template for what could happen. But Stacey Abrams in Georgia,
yeah,
was a local state rep who ran for governor, and she lost convincingly. It wasn't a landslide loss, but it was at least 2.5 points. It was enough of a loss
something like
that there was no disputing it. Even if there was election fraud, which there was not, she still lost. And she refuses to concede. She's delusional. She's still going around acting like she's the governor.
Well, I think that plays into this stereotype, unfortunately, of the empowered, God knows why, Black woman. I mean, she really had not much going for her other than she happened to be, and I'm not even sure how this occurred, the candidate.
No, I disagree with you. I think she was a legitimate candidate.
No. She was a legitimate candidate.
And she had a pretty good record, actually, in the state. But the problem is that either way, she lost the election.
Of course.
The proper thing to do in our system is to concede the loss and then begin to run for the next time and maybe win another time and take your lessons. Not pretend you won, not refuse to concede. She's still going around doing interviews. This is the dime she's running on. And I think that's the example that might be used for Biden. And except that's going to be a bigger catastrophe because that's national.
I don't even know if he's smart enough to do that, or if his handlers would.
Well, he's not smart enough to do anything. I mean, we're talking about whoever's running the show over there. I mean, he doesn't even come out of the basement. Who knows what he does? But we're talking about whoever is behind the scenes on that campaign, and it's not him. I mean, he's like a stuffed doll. He doesn't. I mean, he can't barely string a sentence. I even understand that great speech that he delivered. I don't know if this is proven, but it was pre-recorded. It was edited. It was clean.
Oh, it was definitely edited.
Yeah. So, I mean, he could read off a teleprompter and then have people go in the studio room, removing any of the ums and the ahs and fixing it and putting new lighting and, taking away and polishing it. So, I mean, it shows that he's just a figurehead.
Yeah.
But anyways, anyway, Mike, where can people read your excellent columns?
Okay, all the health stuff is in healthnewsdigest.com. I also mirror that content at one of our business websites, gasdetection.com. And, I have various other social media on occasion, but most of the stuff is on those sites. Mm-hmm. I also have a mikescomments.com that goes back to when I first got on the internet in 1959. And,
wow. I don't know about that.
Yeah. No, but there's some stuff that goes way back. No, really, I started writing this stuff for the web back in 96, which is sort of early on the internet. So there's stuff that goes back a long time. But as always, it's great to be out here on your porch and
thank you.
And have this socially distanced talk.
Sort of, it's a great euphemism for what's going on. Anyway, so Mike, listen, thanks so much for joining me. Always a pleasure. Talk to you
Okay.
next week. We'll do it
we
every
will see you
Wednesday.
next time.
Yep. Thank you.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.